had from my fairly early years to get used to being called a red bastard, or my father was a commie bastard.
It's the duty of communists to influence their children.
Forward to a new and happier Britain.
The Communist Party wasn't a choice, it wasn't an intellectual decision, it wasn't an ideological preference or statement, it was the fabric of the world.
For over 70 years, 3 generations of British children were brought up in a parallel world, spied on by the special branch and branded outsiders in their own country. Their lives were shaped by the politics of their parents. These were the children of the British Communist Party.
The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains.
Children living in a communist family were not just immersed in Marxist doctrine. Many found themselves growing up in a giant red bubble.
Workers of all countries unite.
Our plumber was a Communist Party plumber. Our builder was a Communist Party builder. The bazaars we went to were the daily worker bazaars. The jumble sales we went to were the local branch jumble sales. The kind of social events was the local branch social which we used to host. It kind of created a complete parallel existence.
Many of the parents who belonged to the closed circles of British communism groomed their children to embrace an alternative lifestyle. Often it was an upbringing that left little room for the normal frivolities of childhood.
I was once doing a drawing of some sort of fairy doll, you know what I mean? And I could hear my parents having a blazing argument. My father saying she ought to be painting the advancement of the working class consciousness, and my mother saying, why shouldn't she paint a fairy doll?
Each Christmas would involve some badly made piece of shit made out of wood from East Germany, you know, like a train or a kind of bear that arm would fall off or some, you know. Message inside saying, you know, from Solzhenitsyn, please, I'm being held in a gulag. I'm forced to make wooden bears.
On our kitchen wall was a photograph of Stalin, which I now found, thinking about that, I found that really shocking. This photograph of Stalin was noticed by a little friend that came to some birthday party when I was small, and asked who it was it my uncle? And I sort of mumbled something about it being Uncle Joe.
Many children of communists were deeply affected by their parents' beliefs. In the playground, life could be difficult.
When we were living in Harwell, at about the age of 6, I think I must have been, my father stood for Parliament as a communist. I have abiding memories of early childhood with him coming home with a car full of rotten eggs and tomatoes. They'd been thrown at my father, and I was very embarrassed. I didn't tell people that my parents were communists.
The teacher said at primary school on the first day, I think, where I said, let's thank God for the milk. And I said, no, miss, the milk comes from the Milk Marketing Board, which is a semi-autonomous cooperative founded by the government and involving, you know, blah, blah, blah.
Somebody said, what did your father do? And I said, completely, and he works for the Communist Party. And this boy turned around to me and said, Communist Party? Said, I thought we'd shot them all after the war.
For over 29 years, Harry Pollitt was the General Secretary of the British Communist Party. His son Brian was aware that journalists demonised his father and even targeted him.
I can remember being accosted when I was at a social occasion in the local club playing table tennis by a reporter from the Daily Express who engaged me in conversation. And whose sole purpose it subsequently emerged, was to try to get stories from within the family about differences or difficulties, etc., that would be the making of a good smear story. My father's response when he learned that the Daily Express reporter had got hold of me when I was 13 or 14 was simply to phone up the Daily Express, and I heard the conversation in which he just said, if you get after me, that's fine. You say anything you want. Touch any member of my family, and that's not all right.
But the press weren't the only ones poking their noses into communist family life. They were also under observation by agents of the state.
Mum had noticed that every evening at the corner of the street, underneath the lamppost in prescribed fashion, a man in a trench coat with a big hat was standing there with the collar turned up, ostensibly reading a newspaper and glancing up at their window. And after about the fourth night that he was there, Mum said, "I'm fed up with this," and picked up the phone, rang the police and said, "There's a very strange man exposing himself to children at the corner of this street." And the great satisfaction, about 4 minutes later, 2 police cars arrived, policemen pounded out, and this guy was obviously trying to explain themselves, and they gave him a right battering and dragged him into the police car and drove off, and he was never seen again.
The phone was tapped, we were told by head of the postal union, and they said, "We mustn't have the phone in your sitting room because they can hear everything you say in the sitting room." So it was always in the hall.
They found bugs in the Communist Party headquarters in King Street, and I thought of all the tedious conversations that the people in MI5 and Special Branch would have had to have listened to, and all the sort of minutiae of branch minutes and agendas.
My father once had a letter from the bank manager in his mother's handwriting, the letter from his mother and the letter in the envelope from the bank. I mean, everything was opened.
No aspect of communist family life was exempt from intrusion. In the 1920s, Special Branch even gatecrashed Harry Pollitt's honeymoon.
My mother and my father saw this gentleman sitting by himself without company in this small country hotel and invited him to join them and occasionally to accompany them on walks because they had observed him sometimes taking the same walk as they were. And he, in fact, was the Special Branch man finally responsible for delivering the warrant for his arrest.
But some communists were involved in subversive activities. In the 1930s, Rosa Branson's mother, Noreen, smuggled confidential documents to her contacts in India.
She spent the days going to see the communist parties and taking them things. And in the evening she went to all the dances, the ambassadors thing, and she was actually dancing in the ballroom of the Bombay Taj Hotel with the chief of police while he told her that there was a communist agent who they couldn't get hold of. She was dancing in that ballroom.
John Torrode's father was an activist in the print unions, but he'd also been a secret agent who'd fought against fascism.
My father was an agent. Technically he was an agent of the Comintern, the Communist International. And his first task was literally carrying Moscow gold from Moscow into Nazi Germany to provide money for the German Communist Party, which by then was underground. He'd go to Berlin, to the Alexanderplatz, and there on one side apparently there was a little tobacconist. He'd go into the tobacconist with a rolled up copy of the New Statesman under his arm and with, I think it was a red carnation in his buttonhole. And he'd ask for a particular type of tobacco. And the tobacconist would say, "Well, I'm afraid we have it in the back of the shop, sir." And then he'd go to the back of the shop and give him his body belt full of sort of Moscow gold and trot off again. He always told it as a sort of exciting but sort of fun story for me as a very little boy.
But some children weren't lucky enough to get bedtime stories. At the age of 2, the Marquis of Sligo's great-granddaughter, Rosa Branson, was dispatched to boarding school after her parents joined the Communist Party, relinquished the family fortune, and moved to a slum in South London.
I was very lonely. I remember just feeling very lonely. But I knew what my parents were doing. They were selling the Daily Worker outside Battersea Power Station in the rain. So I never felt they were off enjoying themselves. I was given a very strong feeling that they had this job to do, that my contribution was to, do what I could and help in this way. My father went and fought in the Spanish Civil War. And I always knew they were doing something which was I shouldn't be there.
In 1936, the communist newspaper, the Daily Worker, urged comrades to join the international brigades and fight Franco. Almost 1,000 party members answered the call. Every year, veterans of the Spanish Civil War, and many of the children they left behind, gather in London to commemorate the struggle against Franco and fascism.
It's very important to myself and to the old comrades and the family and friends of those who fought in Spain to come together to remember, their parents, what they did and what they fought for.
Martin Green's life was changed forever when his father was killed by a fascist bullet.
Well, my father was an active soldier until he was killed on the last day that the international brigades were in action before they were withdrawn. That was 23rd of September 1938.
But it wasn't all sacrifice and struggle. The children of communism also had their perks, such as field trips to the Soviet paradise. And Russia was always keen to show the benefits of communism to Westerners.
Everywhere over their vast lands, the Soviet people gather the fruits of their free labor.
We'd go on trips throughout my childhood to these communist countries. We'd leave Liverpool on the bus as an ordinary family, and somewhere on the journey we'd be transformed into these heroes of labour, and there'd be limousines waiting for us at Prague Central Station and stuff like that, and then we'd be, be feted by the authorities.
The children of Britain's communists were treated to holidays in pioneer camps behind the Iron Curtain, where they experienced some of the joys of communist life.
I once went on a fantastic holiday to Bulgaria at the age of 10. Children of people who were working for the Communist Party or who were sort of very actively involved were invited to go to international pioneer camps, and I became a pioneer for a month and wore a little red scarf and was very proud of it. I don't know whether we saluted the flag, but we certainly had a ceremony every morning. A great sense of comradeship, actually. I do remember the Russian delegation being particularly glamorous and beautiful children and falling in love with a young Georgian.
I remember I and a friend of mine were sitting on a seat, and there was a very beautiful weightlifter from Finland who wanted to impress me, so he stood on his hands for hours while we said, for goodness sake, I wish he'd move.
My memory of Russians when we were in the East was always sort of smelling of onions with metal teeth, being kind of overly friendly and giving you stuff, that you didn't. Badges, And I always just like, get off me. It was always just that kind of, they were always drunk, and kind of, little comrade from the West, Oh, great, another badge with Lenin on it,
West's own soldiers and police stand guard on the east-west border of Berlin. The ominous Whitsuntide weekend has begun. Under Allied plans, the British and French are on the line. The Americans are in reserve, for the Reds have called a gigantic youth rally. Youths pour into camps much like the camps once established by Hitler.
Alongside the pioneer camps, the Eastern Bloc countries organised international youth festivals to entertain the children of their supporters in the West.
The Soviets lead off with elaborate pageants, while the world wonders, will the spark to set off World War III be struck here in Berlin?
Well, when I was in the Young Communist League, they had these big youth festivals. And the Berlin Festival, they didn't want us to go to, the Americans didn't. And the engine driver told our lot, look, they are going to take you to a displaced persons camp. And we all got off the train at Innsbruck. And the Austrian youth brought food in for us. And gradually, they took people in batches of 10 secretly over the mountains.
They parade for 8 hours, demonstrating Russia's grip on East German youth. In place of threatened violence, banners tell the Yanks to go.
The Americans were furious, and we got into the Berlin Youth Festival.
Good evening, and welcome to the Royal Albert Hall to witness what has been called the bloodless victory of the Red Army over the British public.
Children of communists were also entertained at home. The Red Army Ensemble put on Cossack sword dances and sang revolutionary anthems to children of the left. They became so popular that performances became part of mainstream culture in Britain.
They were really huge. They were like a kind of a Soviet version of the Harlem Globetrotters. I remember they would sing Roll Out the Barrel was their big kind of finale in this kind of thick in English, but in Roll Out the Barrel, we'll have a barrel of fun, roll, you know. I mean, half of them must have been KGB, presumably.
I'd seen things like Battleship Potemkin in the original Russian by the time I was 9, and so on. When they thought that maybe we were too peculiar, and not doing the things that they thought normal kids could, they were quite capable of suggesting, wasn't it time I went to see a Cliff Richard movie?
Britain's communists often showed their own strength by engaging in local political protests. Many children were aware of their parents' activities, and some even joined in.
There's a big rent strike by some of the tenants in a block of flats in Kentish Town.
Stand up, all victims of oppression, for the tyrants fear your might.
It was known as the St Pancras rent strike, and because he was so active in it, he had to take us from time to time. So I remember standing outside those flats when I was very small while he gave speeches. Arthur Rowe and Don Cook were the two of the tenants' leaders who'd barricaded themselves in. And they'd go, hey ho, Cook and Rowe, with a barbed wire fence and a piano, took 1,000 cops to make them go, 3 cheers for Cook and Rowe.
One of the most famous communist protests took place in 1936, during the Battle of Cable Street in London's East End, when communists clashed with British fascists, led by Sir Oswald Mosley. The conflict would later inspire the playwright Arnold Wesker, whose communist parents took part in the struggle.
I was 4 years old at the time, so I don't have any memory of it. But people spoke about it in such a way that I felt I'd lived through it, and so I was able to recreate the atmosphere and the events of that period.
Wesker went on to write Chicken Soup with Barley, a hit play of the 1950s that could only have been written by a child of communism.
The party members threw marbles in order to make the horses slip. I mean, rather cruel, actually, if you think about it. I mean, someone might have got hurt. God forbid anyone should get hurt on an anti-fascist demonstration.
Oh, and don't move. Not on the careful. On the blood.
Oh, mess you're in.
What's the matter with you?
I fooled you. They told me you were hurt. I nearly died.
Now, look, I was only hit by a truncheon. Now, do me a favour, Sarah, and just make some tea.
My father talked specifically about how the Young Communist League people were used as runners because they were slightly smaller and wirier and maybe slightly fitter than some of the guys who were manning the barricades.
Apparently one demonstration we were all in a cart, all the children who were under 6 years old, shouting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we want Mosley dead or alive. And nobody knew why we got that slogan because it didn't apply to anything. We didn't actually want him anyhow.
The fight against fascism helped the Communist Party reach its highest ever level of popularity. In 1942, after Stalin had abandoned his pact with Hitler, the party's membership soared to 56,000. British communism was on a roll.
We communists are fighting for a new Britain, where the nation's resources are used to satisfy the needs of the people. We want a government to organize speedy victory over Japan, security from war, and an unswerving alliance with the Soviet Union. Forward to a new and happier Britain.
As a child, I attended rallies in Trafalgar Square, the Earl's Court Arena, or the Manchester Guildhall, where there were thousands of people attending and applauding my father's oratory. I could not but realise that he was a well-loved and important figure.
The working class of Britain are made of the same metal as their Russian comrades and only yearn for the opportunity to prove it in deeds. That's my message.
Harry Pollitt was equally popular with Stalin and other leading communists throughout Europe. His son Brian got very close to one of them, Otto Schling.
Uncle Otto was my first experience of what was meant by purges. And in the Times, I saw this item about Otto Schling, my Uncle Otto, having been executed. And I asked my father, I said, what is this about Uncle Otto? And he replied, we do not talk about Uncle Otto anymore in this house.
But others wouldn't forget Stalin's victims.
My father went to see Harry Pollitt, General Secretary of the Communist Party of Great Britain and an old friend, and said to him, look, Harry, you and I both know that this is sort of poisonous rubbish. If anything happens to these people, I've got to tell you, I'm going to hand over everything I've got, all my information about illegal communist activities in this country, to British intelligence. And Pollitt said, very foolishly in retrospect, don't be so stupid, Johnny. You know we, the communists, control British intelligence. And I remember my father explaining all this to my mother, and they went down to the cellar, and I remember them bringing up 3 or 4 cardboard boxes full of documents, whatever, putting them in the back of our little car, and we drove on Saturday afternoon up to the American embassy, and in this quite naive way. I mean, I don't think we'd sort of made any arrangements, or my father had made any arrangements. We sort of turned up and said, hello, could we speak to the intelligence chap? We've got all these secrets about sort of communist illegalities in Britain, and we handed the whole lot over to the CIA.
Joseph Stalin, ruler of a sixth of the earth for 30 years, has been thrown from his pedestal. Stalin is now officially branded a dictator by his own party through its spokesman, Comrade Khrushchev. The leader who is above criticism, the little father of his people, is convicted 3 years after his death of having ruled by terror.
In 1956, the Soviet leader Khrushchev denounced Stalin as a mass murderer. A quarter of British communists resigned in disgust, but others remained loyal.
The attitude that was prevalent in our home was that, mistakes had been made, but, the Soviet Union needed to industrialize to fight fascism, and unfortunately, you can't make an omelette without killing 30 million people in the gulags. I get in terrible trouble for my mother.
In general, my father's view that without Stalin there would have been no Soviet Union. It was as simple as that. And if you had to take the Soviet Union, warts and all, you had to take Stalin, warts and all.
On Saturday evening, we heard that the Russians were moving powerful reinforcements into the country.
The crisis of 1956 intensified when Soviet tanks rolled into Budapest to crush the Hungarian uprising. Many children of communists witnessed their parents' distress as reports of the events unfolded on TV and radio.
The whole family went to have lunch with some friends who were communists also, and but everyone was very tense about the news, and so the radio was on, and the children were in one room and the adults were in another room, and with a little hatch between the two, and the news came through on the radio, and my mother more or less broke down in tears, and everyone was very upset. But our host said, "I think we ought to turn the radio off because I don't want to spoil my meal."
When Hungary happened, I felt very betrayed and angry with my mother.
The great ideal you always cherished has exploded in front of your face and you just won't face it. You just refuse to face it. Now, I don't know how you do it. You just do. You just do. Now, you're a pathological case, Mother. Do you know that? You're still a communist.
All right, so I'm still a communist. So shoot me then. I'm a communist.
Another generation of children would face a similar dilemma in 1968, when Soviet forces quelled the uprising in Czechoslovakia.
My father's immediate reaction was that this was a bad thing, but my mother's immediate reaction, and there was quite a kind of violent family argument about it, was that that the Soviets were entitled to invade Czechoslovakia because they'd liberated it from the Nazis in the first place.
It was quite a relief to be able to criticise the Soviet Union. For so long they'd sort of been in denial about it, and they were having to accept what someone the other day said to me was, they used the words the communist betrayal, and that's what it was really, and they were having to accept that they'd given their lives to something that had been such a huge lie.
Though the party condemned the invasion, events in Prague were a body blow to British communism. Children became disenchanted with their parents' party and sought new channels to express their political radicalism.
I joined this group of young, go-ahead young people, and it was called the Merseyside Marxist-Leninist group. And this was a party that was allied with China and with Albania. We thought Albania was, was really the workers' paradise.
And the focal point for me was the anti-apartheid movement and the movement against the American war in Vietnam. And the Communist Party was very, very slow and backwards in coming forward. The new breed of Trotskyists and libertarian socialists were the ones who had the exciting banners, the exciting slogans, who had lively meetings, and who were much more involved in direct action.
The Communist Party failed in Britain because the objective of the Communist Party was to bring about, in its first instance, a violent and in its later incarnations, a peaceful socialist revolution to an entirely different system of production. Well, pretty obviously, that didn't succeed.
The collapse of communism across Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union is spreading still further. The Communist Party of Great Britain seems to be facing extinction.
As Thatcherism flourished in Britain, communism sank into terminal decline. While the Soviet Union disintegrated, Britain's Communist Party was split by vicious infighting. It was officially disbanded in 1991.
I did not leave the Communist Party of Great Britain. The Communist Party of Great Britain left me.
Although a communist splinter group still exists, the official British Communist Party has vanished. The children of people in the movement have mixed feelings about its demise.
I feel quite shocked that they were so ignorant that they were part of this great betrayal of communism. But on the other hand, I feel very proud of the fact that they really believed in something and very deliberately devoted their lives to it.
They were concerned with helping humanity. And that seemed to me an extraordinarily worthwhile thing.
What the whole experience left me with was a strong feeling of anti-communism.
A deep, deep mistrust of people who believe they're in possession of the truth.
Life is a complex business, and to try and treat it as if it's a series of total givens and simplicities is not only a profound mistake, but is actually probably rather unhuman.
And thank God that we never got any power. I mean, thank Christ that the British people were more sensible than to ever allow anybody like me anywhere near the levers of power.